Bummer.
All right, we are recording.
Excellent. So, hi everyone. My name is Alex, and I'm going to help try to co-host and answer any of your questions. So I just wanted to let you know that in the chat, if you see the chat window in the bottom, you're welcome to use that. Post any of your questions, and we'll try and answer them as we go along, and there will be Q&A time at the end. And I just wanted to also let you know that we are hosting an auction for our upcoming or our currently running series, Fundamentals of Herbalism. This is the first class in the series. So you can jump right in. The series will be hosted at Soul Yoga. Right now it's going to be online, of course, until we get the go-ahead from Larry Hogan that we can meet in person again. But we'll be covering anything from digestive health, which will be our next topic, to all the systems of the human body, as well as corresponding with herbs that might be good to use with those, just like this class. So we're really excited that respiratory is on everyone's minds right now. So we're really excited that we are able to offer this resource for you all, especially in this important time where we should be caring to that system of the body. So I'm going to go ahead and put the auction in the chat box, and you are welcome to check it out now. And it doesn't close until midnight, so you have time to check it out, review the series, and see if the times work for you. But we're no longer inviting like a full series participants to join. So this is this is just a one-time experience. So we'll see how it goes, and I will pass it on to Lacey.
All right, hi everyone. It's nice to see so many folks in the room, and for all the folks that are going to be joining us by video later, hello to everybody. Like Alex was saying, we taught a version of this class a couple weeks ago, and we planned on doing respiratory, back into 2019 as our first class of the herbalism series, because this is the time that people are usually starting to experience asthma and allergies and cold and flu. I know that we all probably have a specific virus on the brain right now, and I will be giving you all a sheet at the end. I'll email you later tonight with the video and some recipes, and also some resources specific to COVID-19. I've been watching other herbalists and kind of compiling things that I think are relevant and good sources, and I'll be sharing all that with you this evening. So we'll be focusing on allergies and how they interact with the body, and also how flus and viruses act with the body. So if you have any questions that are really specific, then we can we can talk about those during the Q&A. So yeah, I guess let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna share my screen with you so you can see the presentation. All right. And Alex, if there's anybody that has questions or needs clarification while we're kind of going along, you can jump in as you need to. Can everybody see this okay? All right, so if you need to kind of like you might need to move your little people faces around and stuff so that you can see everything all right. Okay. So we're going to jump right into anatomy first, anatomy and physiology, and then we'll start getting into kind of the individual ways in which those different allergies and things affect us. So let's start with just the respiratory system. And so you can see on this slide that we have the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. So when we talk about the difference between an upper respiratory infection or a lower respiratory infection, these are kind of the two areas that we're talking about. The upper respiratory is our nose and our mouth, the pharynx, and down into the very kind of top of our larynx and trachea. And then if you use your fingers, you can feel your trachea gently. There's cartilaginous rings that run all the way down your trachea and hold your trachea open. And those cartilaginous rings are going to then go down into your bronchi and your bronchioles. So you can see as we kind of move down into the lower respiratory tract, we have those rings that keep going. And then kind of in the center of our chest is where we have the split, and then we have two lungs, right? One on either side. And then at the very bottom of the image there, you have the diaphragm, which is its own kind of skeletal muscle that also kind of helps with breathing. And we'll get into each of these kind of as we go, but I wanted to give you kind of the overview of like what we'll be talking about. All right, so let's start at the top again. So we have our head, right? And most air is coming in usually through our nose, sometimes through the mouth as well. And the structure that I want to point out here is these little shelves that are kind of inside the nose. And these are called concha. And what's cool about the concha is that their function is to change the air that's coming in to the body. So our body likes to have humid air inside of the body, and it likes it to be a certain temperature, right? We have a body temperature, an internal body temperature, and so all the air that's coming in, it's the nose's job to kind of slow it down and moisten it. So as soon as you get into the inside of your nose, we have all these mucous membranes inside of the nose and all the way down into the lungs, and it starts as soon as that air enters the nose, it starts that process of changing it so that it's the best for our internal environment. So those concha, when the air comes in, it gets kind of swirled around in there. And right, we also have nose hairs that are helping to kind of keep things out and slow down that air so that it has time to moisten and warm as it's coming into the body. And then it goes into the back of the throat there. And where the mouth and the nose come together is kind of a funnel shape, and that's the pharynx. That's the kind of the back of the throat. Also up here in the skull area of our respiratory system are our sinuses. And if you've ever had a sinus headache or sinus pressure, you know where your sinuses are, right? And so for some of us, we have kind of our spots that always seem to get stuffy or infected, right? Like some of us really get that tension headache up here, and others of us will feel it under the cheek area. And you can see that from the cross section here, the side view, that it actually goes back behind the eyes as well, and even back behind kind of where the jawline is. And these are cavities, hollow cavities, but within those hollow cavities are also mucous membranes, right? And they're able to produce mucus when needed. And if you've ever had your sinuses stuffed before, you also know that this is a place where we make noise, right? Because when you have a stuffy nose or you have your sinuses are all stuffed, all of a sudden your voice sounds totally different. And if you sing, you sound really crazy. So this is a place where we have resonance, and that hollowness in the brain in the skull cavity is also where we get kind of that ability to have our full range of voice. And it's also where a lot of our smell happens. So these cavities, while they seem kind of interesting that they're like these open spaces within the head, they do serve a lot of purposes. But when we have allergies or asthma, or when we get sick, this is an area where we might start to produce quite a lot of mucus, and that mucus will come out of those sinuses, and then postnasal drip will happen, maybe where we're getting it in the back of our throat, or we're having a really runny or stuffy or congested nose. So the sinuses are definitely kind of jump into action when needed, when we feel like we might be getting sick. As we move down past the pharynx, we're getting kind of into the trachea here, right? Like, so we're in the back of the throat and into the trachea. And this is a close-up picture of what that looks like on a cellular level. So each of these here, represents a cell. And each of those cells have cilia. You can see that's labeled there. And this is one of the things that I find really interesting about the respiratory system, and just how incredibly intelligent our body is that these cilia, you can think of them like a sea anemone, if you've ever seen pictures of that under, under the water and how they kind of wave back and forth like this. And so these cells, each of these cells has about 200 cilia, and those cilia will beat 20 to 30 times, 20 to 30 times per second. And their job is to move things. And so you can imagine they have kind of this wave-like pattern. And so if you swallow something, probably something small like dust particles, or you inhaled, maybe you're doing a woodworking project and you inhaled some sawdust, it's the cilia's job to start moving that up and moving that out of the body. And once it gets to the pharynx, once it moves it to the pharynx, you have the option of blowing it out of your nose, coughing it out, or swallowing it. Because once things get to the very bottom of the lungs, there's nowhere else for it to go, right? So we don't want particles in the lungs. We don't want actual physical substances in the lungs. And so it's the cilia's job to kind of keep that moving and keep that going up. It's not on this slide, but we'll see it on another slide, that there's also a cell that lines the inside of the mucous membrane, the respiratory system, that's called a goblet cell. And the job of that goblet cell is to produce mucus and to put that mucus onto the surface. So you can see in this picture, we have the cells, and then we also have the cilia, and then there's also what they're calling this mucus layer, which is kind of, it's hard to see, but it's like a clear layer that's on top of the cells there. And this is something that the body does as a form of protection, but it's also a sign that we have a healthy respiratory system. So when our respiratory system feels too dry, that might be a sign that, that we need more mucus production. But also on the other side, right, when we're experiencing asthma or we're experiencing cold and flu, sometimes there's an overproduction of mucus. So there's kind of like a happy medium in there when we're at homeostasis and when our health is at its best, we have a nice mucus layer on there that helps to protect that lining and that tissue. Let's see. So we're moving down now past the trachea, and this obviously is a tree, but it's an upside down tree. So I want you to think about where the trachea comes down and starts to branch here in the middle of the chest. And each of the lungs has kind of this upside down or like sideways tree in it. And this is an image that Tammy Sweet used in her classes that I really enjoyed, especially like a winter tree like this that doesn't have the leaves on it. I think this is a really great way to think about it. So you have, kind of your main branch, the two trunks that come off of your trachea. And then from there, those branches get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until they get all the way to the end. And they're these tiny little branches, or maybe that's where the buds are. So as we go further down into the lungs, you can see again, here's another way of looking at the cilia. And here's also a goblet cell that's producing that mucus. And we have the bronchi, which is the main trunks that come off of the trachea. And then we have the bronchioles, which are the smaller ones. So you have like your main trunk, and then it keeps dividing and dividing again until it gets smaller and smaller. And if you've ever seen pictures of watersheds, that's very much what this looks like as well, right? That they all kind of come back to one space. Yeah. And then at the very bottom of the respiratory system is going to be the alveoli. And those are at the very bottom of the bronchioles. You've got these little sacs. They look kind of like clusters of grapes. And these little clusters of grapes, that's where oxygen exchange and carbon dioxide exchange happens. And so you can see how much surface area there is with all of these little, like grape-like structures that are all next to each other. And so there's so much space there for air to come in and out. Whereas if you thought about this instead of being a cluster of grapes as an orange or a grapefruit, which is what happens when someone has emphysema, they lose kind of this these structures, and the structure becomes just kind of one hollow structure. you lose a lot of that ability for oxygen and carbon dioxide to have their exchange here, because there's not as much space. And so if we were to take all these little, tiny air sacs that are down here at the very bottom of our lungs and lay them out flat, the number is 1,500 square feet that it would cover. And if you think about maybe the size of your house or your apartment, 1,500 square feet is actually pretty big. So this is a really large area, contained pretty small in our body, but the ability for it to have exchanges is pretty extreme. So you can see down here at the bottom, picture C here, is they're showing us that there's only 2 cells to get into the bloodstream that oxygen or something other than oxygen has to go through. So it has to go through 1 cell thickness to get through the alveoli, and then it has to go through 1 more cell thickness to get into the capillary, and the capillary is our bloodstream, right? And so as an herbalist or someone who's working with herbs, this is good to know, because it means that this is a pretty effective system to get herbs into the body. Whereas if we think about our skin is 40 to 50 layers of cells before we can even get down to where the bloodstream is. So, putting something on topically, while it might be necessary for certain things, being able to inhale something is actually a really great way to get something into the bloodstream quickly. And in less than a minute, something that has been smoked or inhaled gets to the brain and to the heart. So that's both, a boon to us if we are thinking about doing an herbal steam or using aromatic herbs to help open up the pathway for air to move into our system. But it's also something to think about when it comes to, harmful substances can get into the bloodstream very easily through our lungs as well, right? So things that we inhale that we might not be able to see even what we're inhaling, but we're spraying something or we're walking through a cloud of dust. Those kind of things can get deep within the lungs and then potentially even into the bloodstream, depending on what it is, with some relative ease. Essential oils are something that can cross into the blood pretty quickly. They're small enough that they can kind of hook on with the oxygen and get right in there. So that's something to think about, as well as maybe how much essential oil you're using and how much do you need. There are some studies out there that show that the ciliary beat frequency, so that's those sea anemones that are moving, that they can be affected by too much essential oil, and that there are some essential oils that might actually increase the beat frequency. So what happens when those cilia are not beating? We have to cough, right? If there's no conveyor belt in the lungs to kind of move things up and push them up and let them be coughed out, then the only way that the body can get those things out is to cough them out. So if you've ever smoked or been around someone who smoked and you've heard kind of a consistent cough that they might have, a smoker's cough, this is because smoking shuts down the cilia and prevents them from doing their job. It anesthetizes them for a certain amount of time, and over time it does long-term damage to these cells. So those cells, again, they go all the way through the system. So something that we want to think about as we're talking about herbs that are helpful for kind of building our respiratory system is thinking about cells that kind of help make sure that those cells, or thinking about herbs that help those cells stay healthy so that all those cells can perform their jobs. The underneath in picture A here, if you look underneath the lungs, you'll see a muscle here. That's the diaphragm. And a lot of people don't think about the diaphragm maybe a whole lot in the respiratory system, or maybe you do if you're a singer, or if you do yoga and kind of deep breathing, you might think about the diaphragm. But the diaphragm is this skeletal muscle that's right below the lungs. And as we breathe in, that muscle, pushes down into our, onto our stomach, and it creates a vacuum and kind of suction to help pull air down into the lungs. And as we release, as we breathe out, it's coming back up and releasing and helping to push push air out of the lungs. And then the other thing that I want to point out is the pleura, which is on the left side, just below the mouth. That's where you'll see the name pleura. And the pleura is the sac that holds the lungs, right? Like all of our organs have a protective layer around them, and each of them has their own name. This one is called pleura, and that is the protective sac that keeps the lungs anchored to the body, but it also cuts down on friction. So as we move, as we're making movements, we're not creating this friction that's damaging the tissue. So we've got this protective layer there. And if anybody's familiar with pleurisy root, or the old time condition that was called pleurisy, that's kind of a callback to this name here, pleura, which was when the inflammation affected that pleura specifically. And so there are herbs that would be used for that. Any questions on those parts right now? All right. Great. So the one thing I want us to think about, let me toggle back to this one real quick. I want to point out that when we look at pictures of the respiratory system, usually the heart isn't included in those pictures. And I think it's interesting, but it makes sense because we're trying to kind of break those systems apart so that we can study each of the systems. But if you look at this picture, you'll see that the respiratory system and the circulatory system, just like all the systems in our body, are intimately connected and absolutely require each other to work at their most efficient and highest potential. And so when we're thinking about lung health, we also need to think about the health of our heart and our circulatory system. So what's happening in this picture is it's showing you that the way that our blood gets oxygenated is that the blood travels around the body and it comes back into the heart, and it gets pumped through one side of the heart, and then it gets pumped to the lungs and it picks up oxygen, and then it goes back to the heart again, and it goes through the two chambers of the heart on that side, and then it gets pumped to the rest of the body. And so there's this loop that's happening there, right, between the heart and then the lungs and then the heart again and then the rest of the body. And that's a part that I feel like is really important for us to understand, because if our lungs are not functioning at high capacity, that blood that's moving into the lungs, that's coming to these little sacs at the bottom of the lung, if they can't pick up enough oxygen, then there won't be much oxygen going to the rest of the body. So this is that critical place where that happens. So I'd like for us to do a little bit of breathing together now that we've kind of seen some of the parts together, so that you can kind of imagine what's happening with the air that we're taking into our body. So take a deep breath. And I'd like to start with a 3-part breath. And some of you might be familiar with a 3-part breath. And what the 3-part breath is going to help us feel is that our lungs, kind of go down to the bottom of our ribs. That's kind of how deep they go into the body. And they start all the way up here, though, at the clavicle, at the collarbone. And so in doing a 3-part breath, maybe we'll be able to feel kind of how large of an organ the lungs are. So with your eyes closed, if you like, take a couple of normal breaths first. Now take a breath by starting to fill up your bottom of your lungs, so your stomach should expand first, and then your rib cage and your heart. And then breathe all the way up into your collarbone. And as you release, feel your collarbone release, your chest starts to relax, and your stomach pulls back in. Breathe in and let your stomach expand. Let your ribs and your heart expand. And let your collarbones expand. Release. Feel your collarbones drop, your heart relax, and your stomach compress. What does it feel like for folks when they take a deep breath like that? If you want to drop a comment, does that feel comfortable for a lot of folks? Does it feel uncomfortable? I'll say for me, I don't think I take deep breaths very often, unless I'm being really conscious of it, right? So to fill up my stomach like that and to fill up my whole heart, that feels like work for me. Maybe some of you are feeling that way as well, that it feels like work, that maybe we're not used to breathing very deeply. What are you seeing, Alex?
It looks like Jess says, not used to it. It's hard. We have Liz saying rejuvenating, Angela cleansing, Jackie saying somewhat uncomfortable but interesting to feel the whole lungs. And Gabby says that she can feel the shortness of breath because she has asthma.
Right, feels tight.
Yeah, feels tight, Carol says. Like a good stretch, says Kelly. So it looks like we've got a lot of different. Someone says awkward, someone says relaxing. So we're kind of on those two sides of the playing field there.
Yeah. Right, and it also might depend on our muscles and our lifestyle, right? If you have a lifestyle where you sit a lot, maybe you don't have the capacity to breathe into your full lungs very often, right? It's a little bit easier if we're laying down or if we're standing, or maybe you do a lot of physical labor, and so these muscles are tight, and so opening those muscles feels awkward, or it feels tight and compressed. Yeah. But whenever I do take a deep breath like that, it usually reminds me that I haven't done that in a long time. That I don't do that very often. I'm kind of a shallow breather. I stay up here with my breath usually. So it's good to stretch those muscles, stretch those tissues, and let them be full. All right, let's close our eyes again, and this time we're going to imagine the way that the blood moves through our heart and into our lungs. And I won't be able to speak as fast as it's happening. So maybe in your mind, imagine slower blood moving through your heart and your lungs. So take a deep breath and let it out. And then as you breathe, imagine this. The right atrium, which is the top right part of your heart, receives oxygen poor blood from your entire body. And it pumps that blood into the right ventricle, which is the bottom right part of your heart. And as you breathe, that right ventricle pumps that oxygen poor blood to your lungs. And as you breathe in, the lungs exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. And as you breathe out water vapor, you breathe out carbon dioxide. But that blood keeps going. And it goes back to the left atrium, the left top side of your heart. And it gets pumped into the left ventricle, the left bottom side of your heart. And the left ventricle is much bigger than the right ventricle. And that's because the left ventricle is responsible for pumping blood to the rest of your body. So it leaves the left ventricle and it travels to your entire rest of the body. It goes to your heart first and up to your brain through the carotid artery and down to your feet and your fingers. And then it all comes back and gets dumped right back into the right side of your heart, into your lungs, into the left side of your heart, and into your body. You can blink your eyes open if you've had them closed. I hope visualizing that gives you a little bit of appreciation for how closely they work together. I think of them as, like brother and sister, like working together. They can't, they can't be separated. They are on the same team, just as all the organs in our body are. But these two, I feel like, have a really special connection where they feed each other directly back and forth. All right, so we've looked at the different parts of the respiratory system, and hopefully some of you had a chance to look at the questions beforehand, and I dropped those questions into the chat. One of the questions that I asked that I'd like us to think about now, the question that I asked is, make a list of symptoms that accompany common respiratory illnesses like cold, flu, and allergies. So you can either drop them into the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and shout something out, I'm going to make a quick list while we're brainstorming together of symptoms that you experience with cold, flu, or allergies.
Sneezing.
Sneezing.
It looks like Angela, oh, that one went, let's see. Jill says post-nasal drainage.
Mm-hmm.
Emmy, wheezing. Deanna, itchy eyes, throat. Carol says sore throat. Headaches, coughing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, what else was there? Runny nose, sinus headaches, muscle aches, congestion, sinus pressure, more labored breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Lethargy,
Right.
fever.
Fatigue and fever for sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great list. Okay. So we've got this little list of things that affect us and things that we feel. So now let's look at a couple of those and try to think about it through the frame of how is the body trying to protect me? So let's look at coughing and sneezing first. What is the body trying to do? Why would we be coughing or sneezing? Anybody can answer.
To release something that's irritating the body?
To release it? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we're trying to get it out, right? The body's saying, get that out of there, cough it out. So there's some sort of irritation and the body's trying to eject it. What about postnasal drip or like runny nose? What is the body trying to do to protect us?
Annabelle says release mucus. Angela says expel. Carol says cleanse. Kimmy, flushing.
Yeah. Yep. Those are all correct, right? So something is irritating the system, whether it's a virus that's coming in and exciting the system, or whether it's an allergen that we've inhaled or eaten. The body's trying to put up its defenses by creating a barrier, and then it's also giving us excess mucus so that we can flush it out, cleanse it out. Yep. What about things like itchy or watery eyes?
Marina and Jackie say flushing out allergens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here's like what 3 big symptoms that a lot of people experience: coughing, sneezing, runny nose, and watery, itchy eyes. And all of them have the same answer, right? That the body is trying to get it out, like flush it out. All right. What about fever? What is the body trying to do to protect us when it creates a fever?
That's the immune system.
Do you want to say more about that?
It's your whatever cells are fighting the virus or a bacteria or whatever to try to stop it from spreading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so fever is the body's response to, right, to infection or to a foreign invader. And as we'll see in a few slides, different viruses and colds like different temperatures in the body. And so they'll reside in different places in the body. And the body's way of trying to eject them is to raise the temperature to a place where they don't like being. So in effect, burn them out, right? It also increases the efficiency and effectiveness of our immune system when our body temperature is slightly higher. Our immune system is always functioning, but when it's just a couple of degrees higher, it actually works better. So that's an adaptation that we have that is helpful, is to fever, so that we can have our immune system working at a higher capacity, and to try to make it an inhospitable environment for whatever is attacking us.
So having a fever in retrospect is like a good thing
Mm-hmm.
that's happening.
Yeah.
From what if it's like, is there like, what happens when there's that point where it's like danger, you have a fever for too long? Like, is that, because that's when it becomes bad.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. And I have a slide on that in a moment that we'll talk about. But yes, there is a point at which the fever is not helpful. But fevering in general is the body's response and is the body's part of the body's healing mechanism.
Gotcha.
What about things like headaches or muscle aches, kind of pain? What's the body doing to protect us?
I want to say slow you down, but I don't know if that's correct at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right? Like I think of pain as the body saying, for one, hey, figure out what's going on with you, something's up. And 2, go lay down. Lay down, be incapacitated, stop moving around. Right? And I know that at least I was raised to think that when I had pain, that meant that I should take something to stop the pain. And usually that meant that I would keep going about doing what I was doing, playing, going outside, going to the movies, whatever I was doing. I would just, take an Advil, and that would get rid of that. And therefore I could continue to do what I was doing. And in years after that, I learned that pain is part of the body's response system to kind of tell us to take a chill pill, and also to evaluate what's happening. Now I kind of see pain as a signal that I don't want to quiet unless I am really struggling with it. Yeah. What about, let's see, difficulty breathing? Someone talked about difficulty breathing, and I'm thinking that this is probably from what we would call bronchoconstriction, which is when the bronchs, remember the larger trunks and the bronchioles, start to close down. Why would the body be closing down the muscles and the tissues of the bronchioles?
Too much fluid, can't move it out.
The fluid can't move it out.
Yeah.
Looks like Kimmy says inflammation. Annabelle says to conserve energy. Christina says to keep from infiltrating lower. Kimmy says too much friction. Annabelle to heal other areas. Marina, minimize infected area.
Yeah, those are all correct, right? One kind of function of that is that the bronchioles are constricting so that less things can get in, right? So it's, especially if there's like an airborne allergen that you've just inhaled, or you have asthma, like, excuse me, my throat's dry. The idea is that the body is trying to prevent more allergen from coming in by making a smaller hole so that not as much can get in. It has the unfortunate effect of making it very hard for us to breathe, but the protective effect is that it's trying to create a barrier for us. And then a couple of you mentioned inflammation and kind of swelling, and I think those really go hand in hand. Inflammation is the body's way of healing. It's the only way the body knows how to heal. And so when there is an allergen or a virus or something that has happened, maybe a wound, a physical wound, the body is going to kind of cordon off that area, like Marina was saying, and keep the infection or keep the wound from going any further. And in doing so, it creates what we call edema or swelling, where the tissues fill with more fluid, and the capillaries where the blood is become leaky and permeable. And this allows white blood cells and other parts of our immune system to leak into that area and to start to attack what's happening there. And so when we have inflammation or swelling, again, this is the body's way of dealing with whether it be a pathogen or whether it be a wound, the body is sending in reinforcements. And so something to think about also is when we inhibit the process of inflammation, acute inflammation, we're also inhibiting the process of our body being able to send in reinforcements and send in kind of the medics and firefighters that are putting out the fire. It's different when we're talking about chronic inflammation, right? This is when the body is sending inflammatory cytokines and sending white blood cells to an area repeatedly over and over, and maybe that area doesn't actually need it, and now we have chronic inflammation. But in an acute situation like this, we want the body to have the ability to take care of the problem, especially when it comes to viruses, because it's not effective to take an antibiotic for a virus. The body has to be the one to kind of do the work for us. All right, so in conclusion, in this section, when the body is giving us all these symptoms, I think it's really helpful for us to take a second and stop and think about what message are we getting from the body right now, or what is the body trying to accomplish, and are there ways that we can help the body do that better, or are there ways that we can speed up that process if it needs speeding up? Martha, you asked about when a fever is unsafe, and there is definitely a place where it becomes unsafe, right? So anything above 100 degrees is considered running a fever. It's normal for our temperature to fluctuate a little bit, especially in the evening. When you take your temperature early in the morning, it might be actually a bit reduced because we've been sleeping. And then it's pretty common, especially if we start to get a cold or flu, that our temperature raises in the evening anyways a little bit. And that's when we might actually start to feel the symptoms of getting a cold or flu. But anything above 100 is considered having a fever. And then you can see between 100 and 104 is considered beneficial fevering. So this is the body, again, trying to burn out, and make an inhospitable environment for whatever has come into the system. And this is important when we're thinking about things like cold and flu, but if we're getting fevers when we're having allergies, this is something that we do want to address, because there's not a reason for us to be having a fever at that time. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, the difference between the immune system responding to a virus and the immune system responding to tree pollen. These are different things, but the body's going to treat them the same, actually. The other thing I want to say is that while I think it's good to kind of let our body have symptoms and experience, what it's like to have our body fight something off so that we can be incapacitated and laying down and sleeping. If we cannot sleep, or if we're doing damage with our coughing, right? Like some people will cough so much that they'll break a rib. That's not, we don't want that, right? Like that's not productive coughing. And that's harmful, and that's when we want to suppress cough. And fevering is very beneficial unless we get to this really high temperature or we're seeing fevering that's going on for more than 3 days. That's when we really want to step in and say, okay, there needs to be some resolution here. So when we can't sleep or when we're doing, physical damage, that's when we really need to step in and be ameliorating and addressing symptoms. But otherwise, I think there are ways that we can make ourselves feel more comfortable without kind of depressing the immune system and the immune system actions. So that's what we'll talk about with some of the herbs that we'll address. All right, and so like I said, different pathogens like different temperatures and conditions. A cold is an infection of our nasal cavity, so right, it's up here. The flu is an infection of the pharynx, that back funnel of the throat. Laryngitis is an infection of the vocal cords. Bronchitis is an infection of the bronchi, so those tree trunks is what gets infected there. And pneumonia is an infection of the alveolar, which is the little grape sacs that are all the way at the bottom. And so that's what, if you're thinking kind of anatomically, like where these pathogens like to hang out, these are their preferred areas and temperatures. And so the body is going to try to raise the temperature enough so that it's, not hospitable anymore in that area for that pathogen, which is pretty cool that our body can do that. So that's, a great thing that the body can do when we have a pathogen, but I want us to think about how a lot of the symptoms that we talked about are the same for asthma and allergies as for cold and flu. But this is when the body is having kind of an unintelligent or an unevolutionarily beneficial response. So this is something that we are breathing in or taking in, maybe as food, that the body is saying like, whoa, that's going to kill us. Send the troops out, get rid of it. But it's generally considered to be something that's safe, right? So like tree pollen, for example, or peanuts for some people, or a bee sting. Like this is the body going into overdrive over something that really shouldn't be causing it to go into overdrive. And this is, specific to each of our immune systems, but this is where we definitely want to intercede, because this is not a healing process. And this is the body overreacting to something that actually is considered safe for humans in general, but our particular immune system is not handling it well. So I did want to make that distinction that like we're going to talk about the immune system next, but I want you to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that like we don't want to impede the immune system when it's fighting a pathogen or flu, but when it's an allergy, it really does make sense for us to intercede here. And it's not just about symptom mitigation, but kind of all the ways that we can try to intercede so that the immune system is not going into action at all. So yeah, let's see kind of what happens when this when this occurs. So somebody already kind of talked about the white blood cells. I think somebody mentioned that earlier, maybe me. And these are some of the white blood cells that are present in our bloodstream. There's the neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. These are kind of the frontline folks, like they show up first. And then we have the lymphocytes. And here's a breakdown of the lymphocytes. We've got T cells and B cells and natural killer cells. And these are the cells that are a bit more specific, and they are part of our adaptive immunity. And here's kind of what it looks like. In this example, we're seeing a wound here, but here's kind of the different players that are coming into action when we have a crisis. And you remember how I was saying that when there's inflammation and when there's edema and swelling, the capillaries become more leaky. So you can see that happening here, where the neutrophil here on the very left side of the screen you can see that it's squeezing through the capillary there and into the tissue, and then it's attacking these viruses here. And the eosinophil doing the same thing here. Macrophage, for those of you that had a chance to look at the note, the macrophage are the big eaters. That's the kind of Latin translation, macro, big, phage, eater. And these are the the white blood cells that are really doing a lot of the cleanup work. And they're able to kind of absorb and eat a lot of the virus cells as well as white blood cells that have died. They're able to kind of clean up tissues that are that have been affected and might be decaying now. And so this is kind of our general cleanup crew. Anytime there's inflammation in the body, these guys are there and they're starting to do their job. And all of these folks that are in this slide here, they're able to send out cytokines. And you can see cytokines is written on here, kind of on the left middle side. And I like to think of cytokines as like our cells' text messages or like a flare. Cytokines are a communication system between cells, and it's a way for cells to talk to each other and create actions on other cells by sending out these different substances. So for example, like an eosinophil, which is our little guy here, it has lots of different uses and it performs lots of different roles in the body. But when it comes to fighting a virus, it can only really like encapsulate and eat like one little particle, and then it's kind of done. So this is one of the ones that might show up first in our immune system, is the eosinophil, and then it might send out a cytokine that says, hey, we need reinforcements. We're going to send up a flare. We need more reinforcements. And then, your monocytes, your neutrophils, everybody else is going to come. Your T cells are going to come, and they're going to be sending out cytokines also saying like, whoa, what's going on? Like we need more people here. We need more. And that's how inflammation kind of is built and is sustained, is these, cytokines that are creating, they're creating, the call for more action. So what we just looked at was kind of the immediate response. And what I want to talk about specifically with viruses and allergies is the secondary response. And this is what we call adaptive immunity. In adaptive immunity, you have your cells that are also white blood cells, and their job is to identify an invader, whether that be a pollen or whether that be a virus, and to make a memory of that invader and build the troops to be ready for that invader for the next time that it comes. So these are the folks that are involved in that, our B cells and our T cells. And here's kind of a breakdown a little bit of what that would look like. So an antigen, which is in your notes, is any word for something that causes an immune reaction. So bee sting, pollen, right? These are antigens. So the antigen comes into the body, and our macrophage, our big eater, eats some of that antigen and takes it to the T cell and says, look what I found. Look at this guy. And the T cell's like, oh, this is not good. We don't want this. So we're going to create a memory of this invader that you just found, and we're going to hold that memory. And that memory cell is going to circulate through the body for weeks, months, potentially years, until we find that invader again. So we'll be ready for it. At the same time, the B cells are also being stimulated by this antigen. And the B cells are saying, well, you know what? We know what we can do. We're going to make an antibody. And in this case, we have the IgE antibody here. We're going to make an antibody that is specific to this virus, this protein. And we are going to send that out in the bloodstream. And when it comes into the bloodstream again, we'll be ready to bind to it so that we can absorb it and we can get rid of it. So the B cells send out these antibodies, and the antibodies are specific. And those antibodies kind of catch a ride on the mast cells. And those mast cells are in different parts of the body. And the mast cell is is pretty responsible for the release of histamine. And for those of you that experience histamine, like I'm really reactive to bug bites in particular. They make me super, super itchy. So for those of you that have experienced histamine releases, this is something that we probably want to mitigate, right, when we're experiencing allergies in particular. So this is kind of like where that happens. And this is where some of our herbs are going to come in. So again, I just want to show you that like the antigen and the antibody that the B cell creates is specific. So the antibody that is made, let's say, for example, you are allergic to milk. Your body is going to produce an antibody for that milk protein, and it's going to circulate through the blood. And when it finds that milk protein that comes in again the next time you drink milk, it's going to bind to that milk protein, and then it's going to take it to a cell, or it'll be on the mast cell already. And that mast cell is going to send out those cytokines, the histamine, and it's going to send out the alarm that it needs to go into full action because it found the invader. One thing that's important to note is that once your body has made memory cells and antibodies to a specific thing, they don't go away. So you don't lose those antibodies, basically. They're just going to continue to be ready for the next time it happens. So if your allergy is a specific tree that flowers every year, you're going to have antibodies that are ready for that. Now, there are ways that we can shift kind of our internal and external, environment so that we can be more prepared and have less symptoms, but the body's going to continue to see this as an invader. There's not really a way that we can trick it into thinking that it's no longer an invader, unfortunately. And I wanted to show you that, did somebody have a question? Okay. I wanted to show you that different viruses have very different shapes, right? So here we have the Ebola virus and we have the HIV virus. And so when we create antibodies in the body, the antibodies are specific to the shapes of these different viruses. And so if you ever hear things about that in the news of why it's interesting to know what the shapes of these different viruses look like, that's like our body is trying to create those antibodies that are specific to those. And that's also something that we can be looking for in the blood if they're like testing to see if you're allergic to something, they're looking for these antibodies. All right, so here's another way of looking at that same idea. So the little Y's there are the antibodies, right? And all the allergens that came into the system bound to those antibodies. And the antibody is riding on that mast cell, right? Like that's its little horse that it rides on. And the thing about mast cells is that oftentimes they are what we would call unstable, and they degranulate or burst open easily, especially when allergens bind to the antibodies in several places. That makes it very easy for the mast cell to be like, whoa, this is a lot going on, like burst open and let the histamine go everywhere. And this is also a place where we can intercede with herbs. Nettles in particular is really good at stabilizing mast cells. All right, so here
looks like we have Marina saying we have talked about cold and flu and allergic reaction. How do other reactions such as sensitivity, food, chemicals, etc. fit in?
like an allergen to a perfume or something like that?
Yeah, in terms of chemicals or...
Sorry, people have food sensitivities and sensitivities to other things that's not a true allergy.
Yeah.
By the medical definition, I was just wondering how that differs from, or how that fits in.
Yeah. As far as the body is concerned, Marina, it doesn't see a difference. The body's going to treat it the same regardless. It's going to create antibodies. It's going to create a memory cell. And so for that purpose, and Tammy Sweet, my teacher, is also kind of a teacher of this, that it doesn't really matter what the distinctions are. Like, you can call it a sensitivity, or you can call it an allergy, but the body's going to react the same regardless. Some people have like you know, a more extreme allergy to something and they're going to break out in hives or they're going to have anaphylaxis. But that doesn't mean that just because what you experience is maybe an upset stomach or some diarrhea, that doesn't mean that the body's not going through that same process. It's going to go through the exact same process and try to, you know, deal with it in the different ways that it knows how to, which is always inflammation for one. Hope that's helpful.
I have a question.
Yep.
So the herbs that you're about to talk about, so these kind of help keep these mast cells more, say, like, so they don't cause any more trouble, or like a little bit more calm. Is that like kind of like the purpose of these herbs? Because you can't get rid of them, like you were saying, they'll always kind of like float around you, but there's ways to kind of like, I guess, like check them or like, you know, ease the process, like per se allergies, like ease all those little things that happen.
That's right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So for some herbs, we're going to be using them maybe to mitigate this process, right? To stabilize mast cells or to kind of down regulate the amount of cytokines that are being sent out, right? We're kind of putting a block up in front of the text messages and saying like, nope, nope, nope. So that's some of the ways that the herbs are interacting. When it comes to cold and flu, we might be kind of augmenting actually the cytokines or even like the reactions that are happening because we want the body to be doing that. But either way, this is kind of the level that we're able to interact in. And also with herbs, we have the ability to work energetically, which is to say, like, if we have a really wet cough, like a wet cold cough, and I'm sure you've heard that before where somebody's coughing and you can just hear the liquid in their lungs. Herbs have the ability to work energetically as well. And so we might pick an herb that we know is really fiery and really dry, like elecampane, because we know that that's going to help clear up some of that mucus and clear up some of that, you know, thin that mucus out for us. And so that's what I think is so cool about using herbs for these processes, is that we not only have the ability to work at it from kind of a, you know, you can spend all day reading NIH studies about how these different cells and cytokines work and where herbs might interact. But then we also have the ability to just change the environment and the tissues through herbs or through, you know, home remedies like a steam. If we, you know, make a steam bowl or have a big pot of soup that we put our face over, that steam has a profound effect on how our respiratory system functions right after that, right? I grew up with a brother that had asthma, and whenever he would have an asthma attack, we would turn on the hot water and put him in the shower so that he could breathe in the steam, so that it would open and dilate those bronchioles that were closing down because he was having an asthma attack. So yeah, I think this is the place we can start to think about where herbs come in.
Gotcha.
So here's just another way of looking at it, right? So we have the allergy that comes in this case, ragweed. Our body is making these antibodies, the IgE antibodies, and it's also making a memory cell. And then those IgE molecules are attaching themselves to the mast cell, and then the mast cell is ready whenever that ragweed comes again to release histamines, release cytokines, and to start the process of inflammation, which is the body trying to protect us. And with that comes all the symptoms that we're used to. Here's another picture just to think about it from the perspective of the lungs. This is the alveolar down at the very bottom of the lungs again. And a lot of people are actually allergic to cockroaches. I don't know if you knew that, but the feces of cockroaches can give a lot of people asthma. And so you can see here on the left is homeostasis. This is when we are healthy and when we are not being presented with an allergen. And we already always have macrophages down there. We always have these immune cells that are hanging out down there. And another thing that I didn't mention about the alveolar is that we also have a cell called a surfactant cell. And the surfactant cell, its job is to put surfactant, like a substance, into the alveolar. And the reason is the alveolar and those bottom structures of the lungs don't have cartilaginous rings like our trachea do. And so every time we breathe in and breathe out, those little sacs at the bottom of the lungs, they inflate and deflate. And if we didn't have surfactant, they would stick together when they deflated, and we wouldn't be able to push them open again without great force. And this is actually for children that are born prematurely, this is one of the reasons they have to be on, you know, oxygen and have extra support, because they don't produce surfactant yet if they're born prematurely. When we're in utero, when we're in our mother, our lungs are full of water, and so we don't need surfactant until we're born. And so someone that's born prematurely, they have to have you know, help with this. And there are some viruses that attack this cell in particular and make it so that we're not producing surfactant, and therefore it becomes difficult to breathe because the, you know, the alveolar comes together, and then it's really hard for it to pull back apart because it's stuck, right? It doesn't have that slippery thing that keeps it, you know, able to move back and forth without sticking together. So we can see that when we have the allergen here on the right side, the cockroach, all of a sudden that capillary becomes leaky again, right? You can see that the monocytes are leaving the blood, and that's when they become a macrophage. It's the same thing, just a different name depending on where it is in the body. And those macrophages are going in and trying to attack, you know, the problem, and they're creating inflammation, edema, swelling, potentially pain. All right, and this is what's going on when we have asthma, right? The normal bronchiole is on the bottom there. It should be open. It should have ridges inside of it, and it should have that connective tissue that looks nice and healthy. On the top there is the asthmatic bronchi, and you can see not only is there too much mucus being produced, that yellow substance is supposed to be the mucus, but we also just have swelling in this area because this area is feeling under attack, or it's, you know, it's been triggered, and now it's being kind of shut down to try to protect it, but in the process is making it very difficult for us to breathe. So we need to find herbs that help us to open. All right, so what can we do about cold and flu? First, we can make sure we're getting enough sleep if we have a sickness. I've listed a few herbs there that might be useful for that: hops, passion flower, valerian. Manage your stress. We know that when we are under more stress, or when we are experiencing stress, our immune system is compromised. You know, we're putting out all of these hormones that are stress-inducing, and then that interferes with the immune system process. You can boost your base immunity from the bone marrow, and this is where white blood cells come from. So all of our lymphocytes come from the bone marrow, and medicinal mushrooms in particular are really great for boosting base immunity there. So that might be taking reishi, you know, as a tincture every day, or that might be making reishi soup once a week, or that might be incorporating shiitakes into your lifestyle, or lion's mane mushroom into your lifestyle. So finding ways to boost your bone marrow's capacity to create more white blood cells. Steam, like we talked about, relaxing the bronchi with steam. You can add herbs to that, but any steam is going to help relax the bronchies. So even if, like I said, all you have is, you know, a tea kettle or a pot of water, or you need to just go step in the shower and turn it on hot so that you can feel this, you know, breathe in the steam. Decrease mucus production if it's hard to breathe. We can use astringent herbs for that, and astringent herbs are herbs that are drying. And if you've ever chewed on sage before and then felt how dry your tongue felt afterwards, or maybe if you've had a persimmon that wasn't ripe yet and it dries your mouth out completely, or a banana that's not very ripe yet, they can be very astringent. So there are herbs that we can use for that as a gargle maybe, or as a tea, that might help to reduce the amount of mucus, especially if it's difficult to breathe. Using a humidifier, especially through the winter. If you heat your home in the winter, which I assume most of us do, that changes the humidity and it can bring it down to below 10%. And our body really wants to be humid and warm on the inside, right? That's the point of the concha, right, is to create that humidity and create that warmth, so everything that's coming in stays that humidity, so that it can keep the mucous membranes happy. By using a humidifier in your bedroom, at least, you're able to keep those mucous membranes happy so that you're not waking up completely dry. What happens when we're completely dry, or when we have, you know, that sore throat that you might get after sleeping, you know, in a heated environment, is that the mucous membranes aren't fully covered anymore, and so there might be gaps or cracks, or it might even get to the point where the skin itself starts to have you know, cracking. Like if you've everybody's probably washing their hands a million times a day right now, and your hands are probably getting super dry. This can happen on the inside as well, and that makes it really easy for a pathogen to come in if there are these compromised areas. Hydrate. All of the body's functions depend on water, and broths are a great way to do that. Allow the body to fever, right? So what we talked about, fevering is good, and don't eat while you're fevering. The body's already working on things, and if you're really listening to your body, you probably don't want to eat at that time. You know, broths, water, of course, that's a good idea, but preventing yourself from eating a full meal when you're fevering, and then resting for several days after you've been fevering. These herbs that I listed here, elderflower, yarrow, and boneset, are all good at helping the body to fever and break a fever, right? So helping the body to raise the temperature a little bit so that it can break the fever and you can feel relief. Anti-inflammatory protocols, there's all different kinds of protocols out there for an anti-inflammatory life, but things like sugar, wheat, dairy, any other triggers that you know cause inflammation, right? Maybe it's a food that you love, but you know that you don't feel so great after you have it when you're experiencing cold or flu, or when you're trying to protect yourself from cold and flu like we are right now with this virus. Considering cutting back on the things that you know aggravate your body so that your immune system is not taking up time with that kind of thing. And then understand with cold and flu that you're going to feel better before your body's actually finished recovering. So be gentle with yourself for a couple of days afterwards. This is a time when a lot of secondary infections happen, and it can make an infection, you know, happen like a pneumonia infection that happens after you've had a flu, can happen if we jump back into things too quickly. What can we do for allergies? Pretty much all the same stuff because it's the same reaction, but a couple extra things you might want to think about, especially if it's a respiratory allergy that we're talking about. So making your bedroom or your house, if you're able to, a sanctuary, right? Like when you come in, if you know it's allergy season for you right now and all the trees are starting to put their pollen out, when you come in the house, take those clothes off. They don't come into your bedroom. Close your windows, use an air purifier. Think about doing, you know, dust covers for your pillows and mattress for dust mites, because that might be a potential allergen. Keep a journal, you know, see what's happening outside. Oftentimes, if your allergies are pollen related, they'll get worse after a rainstorm because the rain will actually make those pollen molecules explode when the rain hits them, and then you'll have like more pollen counts after that. So thinking about that kind of stuff. Taking a shower, rinsing with a neti pot. These are physical ways of pulling the allergen out of your system or away from your body so that your body can start relaxing and not continuing to have this, this reaction. And then start treating your allergies about 2 months before they start. So for nettles and reishi in particular, you're going to want to start those about 2 months before. So if you get allergies now, then you want to start, you know, in January, starting, you know, to take these protocols and start incorporating these practices maybe into your life so that by the time the allergies come, hopefully you've mitigated some of these things and your immune system isn't going to overreact quite as much, right? And then all the same stuff as before. So there are a couple different kinds of herbs that we would think of for symptom relief for cold and flu or allergies. The first is an expectorant. These are herbs that help the body remove excess mucus from the lungs, and they loosen the mucus and encourage coughing. Now this seems really counterintuitive probably because at least I was grown up to believe that if I'm coughing, I should stop it. But if we think back to what the body's trying to do to protect us, it's trying to expel whatever is in the body. So in certain situations, we want to encourage it. If, for example, there are deposits of mucus deep in the lungs, we want that to be coughed out. But we want to make sure that it's a productive cough, right? So that it's not a cough that is causing physical damage, right? Like we're not breaking ribs, we're not like hurting ourselves, but that we are allowing things to come up and out. And there's, you know, you can kind of track the color of things that are coming up and out as well and kind of see like how that's progressing. But there will be times that you're going to want to maybe suppress. So we've got mullein and coltsfoot and ginger and garlic and elecampane. These are all herbs that we consider expectorants that help us to get things out. Anticatarrhals are herbs that help dissolve and eliminate, and they also prevent the formation of more mucus and inflammation of the mucous membranes. Bone set's definitely one of my go-tos for cold and flu. Lemon, garlic, peppermint, ginger. A lot of these can also be herbs that are, like in your pantry, so you don't have to necessarily go out and get special things. But these are going to be herbs that that help to thin and dissolve mucus. We have astringent herbs, which we already talked about, right? These are the herbs that are drying. So they're going to shrink the tissues, kind of help to create a tighter barrier. Goldenrod is one I think of, especially for cold and flu or allergies in the fall. Blackberry leaf is a great one. Antispasmodics, these are herbs that calm the nervous system and the muscular spasms. So think about when you're coughing, if you get that kind of cough that just like, it can't stop and it's just like spasming all the time. This is a great category of herbs to think about. Peppermint, ginger, mullein, fennel. These are herbs that help to kind of soothe and smooth out the muscles so that we're not feeling that kind of racking cough, or we're not feeling that like constant tickling in the back of our throat. These herbs also tend to be herbs that are very aromatic. And so these are herbs that are great for putting into a steam, or eating, so that we can have that experience of those volatile oils helping to open up the breathing passage. And then antivirals, these disrupt, inhibit, and protect against viral pathogens. So elecampane, elderberry, all of our medicinal mushrooms, bone set, these are all herbs that fall into that category. So here's our reishi. And reishi is an herb that you can find in this region. It generally grows on, what? I just lost the word. If somebody remembers the tree, it starts with an H, I think. I just totally lost the word. If somebody remembers, go ahead and drop it in there where reishis grow. But this is the reishi, and it's not a mushroom that we eat like shiitake. It's a mushroom that is a little bit more fibrous. So you're going to want to make it into a soup, and I'm going to send you a recipe after this class for a reishi stew, something that you can make at home. And again, this is helpful in kind of autoimmune and allergy situations, and it helps to build the base immune system. So it's nice because it's a modulator. It doesn't increase things for people that have an autoimmune issue, but it also helps to build base immunity for people that maybe are lacking.
Looks like folks are saying hemlock trees. Is that what you?
Yes. Yes.
And we also had one question that I missed. What's macrophage another name for?
Monocyte.
Monocyte.
Yeah, when they're in the blood, they're called monocytes. When they leave the blood, when the capillaries become leaky and they enter into the tissue, then they're called a macrophage. Yep, it's a white blood cell. All right, elderberries. Folks probably are familiar with using elderberries. You can make elderberry syrup, or you can use the elderberry flower. I find the elderberry flower to be really nice for fevering in particular. It's a diaphoretic, which means that it helps us to break a fever. It helps us to move heat from the middle of the body out towards the exterior of the body so that we can heat the body but then release it. So if you're thinking about stocking an apothecary for fevering, elderflower is one that I would definitely recommend. Elderberry is actually an herb that I consider more nourishing than I consider it to be. Like, it has antiviral properties, but it's not a very strong herb in that sense. It's something more, though, that I think of being really protective to the cells, and it helps the cells to, I guess the signal that it sends to the cells is to batten down the hatches and make themselves less permeable. So what happens when a virus comes into the system is that it attaches itself to a cell and then takes over that cell, and then it makes that little cell become a factory for itself, and then that cell, our own cells in our own body, become little factories that create more viruses, and those viruses leave that cell and infect other cells. So one of the things that elderberry is known to be good for is to help protect cells from being permeable, from being attackable. Let's see. It's also a cytokine modulator, and then it helps to decrease virus replication. So once a virus has already started to replicate in the body, it helps us to prevent that. Some folks are talking about using the leaf of elderberry right now, especially for COVID-19. Stephen Buhner is somebody I would look to if that's something you're interested in. A lot of people have been told or been taught that different parts of the elderberry are toxic, when in fact it's actually kind of that it's an emetic. It makes people throw up. Not everybody, but there are folks that use different parts other than just the berries and the flowers. And Stephen Buhner is somebody you can look at, and I will send that in the notes, his writings on that. Licorice. Licorice is the root of a plant that it takes about 3 years of growing the licorice before you can harvest it. We're just hitting our 3rd year of licorice this year, so we'll be able to harvest some licorice. Licorice prevents white blood cells from migrating to the site of the inflammation. So oftentimes when we're having an allergic reaction, there will be a secondary phase of more blood cells, more white blood cells coming and creating more inflammation, and that will kind of keep going, especially if more cytokines are being released. And so licorice can kind of help to mitigate that. So when we're thinking about allergies in particular, it might be a good thing, right, to prevent that secondary reaction of like more inflammation of happening. Licorice is also thought of as a synergy plant, that it helps to kind of boost the actions of other herbs that it's paired with. It also tastes really great, so a lot of people use it that way. It is contraindicated, which means it is not a good plant for people to use if you have high blood pressure or if you have heart concerns, like if you have an arrhythmic heartbeat already. This might be a plant that would aggravate that, and so it might not be a plant for you to use as a synergistic plant. This is boneset. Boneset grows in our region. You can find it. I found it up in the watershed in Frederick before, for those of you that live in Maryland. Eupatorium perfoliatum. Perfoliatum refers to the way that the leaf looks like an entire leaf that just has a stalk that is like punched up through it. And so it's hard to see in this picture, but if you look all the way at the bottom of this picture, you can see how the stem just goes right through the leaf, and it looks like one leaf. Boneset, it's the flowering top that we use and the leaves, and generally it's tinctured, but you could make a tea, but it's extremely bitter, so you probably wouldn't want to. Not the most delicious. The boneset increases macrophage, right? So macrophages are kind of our more, more powerful white blood cell that can go in and modulate and clean up, dead blood cells, clean up that, viruses, that kind of thing. So we want more macrophage when it comes to a virus in particular. And boneset is considered to be something like 4 times more powerful than echinacea when it comes to stimulating immune response. This is elecampane. This is the top of elecampane. This is the root of elecampane. It's the root that we use for medicine. Elecampane is the one that I mentioned that's really hot and dry. And so I think of this plant in particular when there is stagnation and wetness and coldness in the lower part of the lungs in particular. So it's really good for bronchitis and pneumonia in particular. So it can also be used as a tonic, like as a tea, to try to prevent try to prevent sicknesses and illnesses from going deeper into the lungs. So for roots, you usually want to decoct them, which means you want to put them on the stove in a little pot of water and simmer them, for 20 minutes or so. This one has a lot of essential oils in it. It smells really strong. It smells delicious. So you're going to want to simmer it with a top on so that you're not losing all those essential oils. You can also make a tincture of it.
Back to boneset, we had a question. Is it safe for children?
Boneset. So boneset is one of the plants that has the PAs in it, the alkaloids that are also in comfrey. So folks do have some concerns about using it, especially if you already have liver issues. My feelings about boneset, and I think that if you have children, you should do more research, but my feelings about boneset is that generally you only need to use it for 1 day, maybe 2 days, and it tends to be really quick. And so it's usually, for me, like it's like a 1 or 2 dose plant that then like I'm seeing a resolution to my flu or my cold. So it's not a plant that I'm using very often or very much. But I think doing a little more research is good.
And you mentioned that boneset would be good in tincture form. Can you briefly just discuss how to make a tincture, please?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's the flower and the leaf, again, that we're harvesting when it's flowering. To make a tincture, I would harvest the flower and the leaf, and I would cut that up into small pieces, and then I would put that into a jar, and I would fill that jar with high strength alcohol, so probably 50, 60, even 70% alcohol. And then I would let that sit for, you know, a couple of weeks probably, shake it every so often. And then when you strain it out, all you're left with is the alcohol that has pulled out all of the constituents from the plant. And you can put it in a dropper bottle and take it in drop form. And I think, let's see, bone set, I didn't give you a dosage here, but I can look up a dosage and send it to everybody by email.
Thank you. Amanda asked fresh, not dried.
You can use it dry. Yeah, you can tincture it dry. You can often look for recipes or ratios online for tinctures. I'll send that as well. Yeah, I can send that. Right, because for dry, you might use a different ratio of alcohol to plant mixture. But I'll send that to everybody. All right, elecampane, excellent. Here's nettles, right? Nettles is coming up right now. And nettles is one that people really swear by for hay fever and kind of pollen allergies in particular. And nettles is great at stabilizing the mast cells like we were talking about before. And then let's see, what else did I write down? During like an acute allergic reaction, folks will take 2 dropperfuls every 15 minutes until the allergy, you know, kind of stops. But if you're taking this more tonically, like if you're preparing for hay fever, right, you know that it's coming in 2 months, then maybe you're taking this, you know, a couple drops in water every day, maybe twice a day with your reishi or something like that. Like if you have a protocol that you're following, like this might be an herb, or maybe you're using it as food. You're making nettle pesto, you're making nettle soup. I really recommend doing food options whenever you can because it's easier to incorporate. Here's the chemistry of stinging nettles a little bit, just in case you're curious. When you make a nettle soup or something like that, you deflate the little hairs that are on there and you won't be stung by it internally. So if you're worried about that, there are ways when you harvest it that you no longer have to worry about the sting of the stinging nettle. But a lot of people use stinging nettle in therapeutic ways and actually sting themselves on purpose. That's a different time. That's a different subject. Here's mullein. A lot of you have probably seen mullein on the highway, in particular, like when you're driving down the highway, you'll see all this, you know, yellow flowers, tall yellow flowers. The mullein is a plant that grows in disturbed areas, and it's the leaf that we're using often for respiratory issues. But you can use the flowers and the roots in different ways as well. So for the leaf, we're thinking about that as a cooling and moistening tonic for the lungs. It makes a really delicious tea. It's very mild as a flavor. And I'll send you a recipe afterwards for a mullein tea that comes from our friend John, who's a supporter of Foxhaven. And he likes to make his mullein with astragalus and with maybe a little bit of hyssop and then some honey. And he makes a gallon of it at his time of allergies, and he'll drink, you know, a quart or 2 every day to kind of help keep his lungs feeling not quite so tight and feeling more moistened and able to, you know, able to move. All right, New England aster is also an herb that we think of for the allergies in particular, for asthma in particular. You can eat the fresh flowers, or you can use them as a steam, or you can use them as a tea. It seems to not be quite as effective as a tincture. This is one that you might think of using more, you know, with a steam bowl, or if you have like a little personal nebulizer, you could put it into that. Here's plantain. Plantain is a great plant to tincture fresh or to eat the leaves. You can throw this into, you know, a salad when they're young. And plantain decreases those basophils, the eosinophils, and the mast cells, and it decreases cytokine production from those cells. And then it's helpful in controlling bronchial spasms. It's also a plant that we consider to be mucilaginous, which means it, creates like a mucusy substance, but it's also a little bit drying. So it's nice because it has kind of that that dual action there of like helping to moisten the mucous membranes, but also kind of tighten the cells by being a little bit astringent. And this is one that a lot of us probably have in our yards, in our parks, in our gardens. Make sure that where you're harvesting it, a dog didn't just pee there or something, or you know what's happening in that region, so that you're not harvesting things that are not healthy. But this is a plant that's free and easy for a lot of people to have access to. This is colt's foot.
Hold on, we have a couple of questions here. Is it possible to use herbs in a nebulizer?
Well, if you have like the personal nebulizer that's like the handheld one, you can drop the flowers into that. It depends on what kind of nebulizer you have, I think, and like whether you have access to putting something into a liquid, or whether it's kind of the kind that's made for a cartridge to go into it. Does that make sense? But they make like personal ones that you can buy at a store that's like a little steam mask, a little nebulizer steam mask.
And then we do have some folks asking about amounts of astragalus prophylactically acute respiratory condition. I'm not exactly sure how to answer that.
Yeah. Let me look that up and I'll send it in the email. Astragalus prophylactically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Like the amount needed for an acute respiratory condition.
Okay. Okay. This is colt's foot. This is a plant that we talked about being an anti-catarrhal that helps to thin out mucus, and it produces a little bit of coughing in the beginning, but is usually helpful in creating a cough that's more productive. This is another plant that has those PAs in it though, and so some folks don't feel comfortable using it, but it's a plant that grows in our region and can be harvested in our region. So I do like to talk about it. And it's another one that like you're usually not using very much of it for very long. Here's goldenrod. A lot of people think that they're allergic to goldenrod. Probably not. Goldenrod is not a plant that is wind pollinated. It has to be pollinated by insects, but you could certainly have an allergy to it if you're walking through a field of goldenrod and you get a bunch of the pollen on you and then that gets into your nose. Somebody could be allergic to that for sure, but for a lot of people it's ragweed that they're actually allergic to, and the goldenrod is really helpful in clearing up especially watery eyes and kind of that runny nose. It's a drying plant, so especially when we get kind of that deluge, that'll be helpful in drying that up for us. Violets. Violets are another plant that has that mucilage in it, and so it's nice and slippery and wet for our mucous membranes, and it's high in vitamin C. So especially if we're eating it fresh, we're going to get the vitamin C, and vitamin C is also thought to be antihistamine over a certain amount of vitamin C. You probably need to take it as a supplement to get the amount that you would need unless you're eating a big old violet salad, which you could do. These are flowering right now, and you can eat both the flower and the leaf. And then garlic, good old garlic. You know how when you eat garlic, you then have garlic breath forever? It's because the sulfur that's in the garlic, some of the compounds that are in the garlic are actually expressed and pulled out of the body through the lungs. It's not processed through the digestive system. That volatile oil travels through the bloodstream into the lungs and then is expressed with the carbon dioxide out into the world. And so that's kind of interesting to think about how garlic can be protective to the lungs through kind of this air exchange that's happening. But also a lot of people will use garlic specifically for its antiviral properties, and it's also antibacterial and antifungal. And so using it fresh in your food, you don't want to cook it if you're trying to use it for medicine, or at least throw it in at the very end of sauteing some greens so that it's as close to raw as possible, because that's going to be the stronger, more potent way to use it. And again, this is kind of a strong, fiery herb. So this is an herb that's really great for thinning out thick mucus and helping to warm up the system when we have a deep cold, wet cough. All right, and I'll send you some of these resources. These are the herbal resources, a couple of the ones that I've compiled, and I have more to add to this. There's a couple of really great videos out there now of the anatomy and physiology of what's happening in COVID. For folks that are interested in that, they have some like videos with graphics of kind of the best that we understand it at the moment. And then I have a compilation of different herbalists that are using, different herbs and suggesting different herbs for COVID. So I'll share all that with you along with some recipes. All right, so I know we're at our time, but for anybody who wants to stay, I'm happy to do Q&A now, or if you have things you want to share with us, your own ways of using herbs, this is a great time for us to share information with each other.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions. One, can you speak to the warnings of cytokine storms that we are seeing related to COVID-19? Likewise, there was some discussion, I guess, on whether or not elderberry syrup is okay for COVID.
Yeah. Okay. So there are a lot of people asking about elderberry and whether it's appropriate for COVID. Just one second. All the different herbalists that I've listened to have said that they don't see evidence that elderberries cause cytokine storms, which I've seen that concern out there. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence for that. So that's something that they're saying they don't feel like that's something to be worried about, but that most herbalists are saying that they don't feel like elderberry is necessarily the right herb for treating COVID. One, because it's not strong in its actions for actively fighting, but also that it's just not maybe one of the herbs that's best indicated, that there are other herbs that are better for the lungs in particular. But that being said, especially if you're going to be pairing elderberry with things like cinnamon and star anise and coriander, cardamom, like these really warming, spicy herbs, ginger, that I don't see a problem in using elderberry prophylactically or preventatively. But if you start to feel symptoms, a lot of herbalists are saying that this maybe isn't the herb to be using for active infection of COVID. So that might be the time when you would switch off to using other herbs and not elderberry anymore.
I was wondering, Lacey, hi, it's Annabelle. My doctor has a 3-lung tea that he does with mullein and with pleurisy root, but he also has fenugreek seed in it. What do you feel about fenugreek seed? Is that one that you really think makes a difference? Because I struggle with some severe asthma.
Yeah. Fenugreek seed is one that's in Matthew Woods. Matthew Woods has that listed as one of his herbs that he's recommending for COVID, but also just kind of for lung health in general. Fenugreek's considered a mucilage as well, so protective to the mucilaginous, the mucous membrane. And then it's also, I guess, considered an antispasmodic because it has those volatile oils in it. So yeah, I think that people do use it for lung health and lung relief.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All the questions.
All right.
Can any of the cytokine modulating herbs actually cause a cytokine storm?
Not to my knowledge. No, I think it's definitely worth continuing to look at scientific studies and what people are seeing right now with COVID. But my understanding is that these cytokine storms are coming pretty late in the game. when folks are already, already on incubators, when they're already on ventilators, and when they're already pretty progressed into the sickness. And this is kind of one of the outcomes of the virus taking over so many cells, destroying so many cells. And they specifically attack that cilia and the surfactant cells. So that's kind of what I'm seeing based on what I'm reading, is that those are the cells that are being attacked by COVID. It's down in the alveolar.
Do you recommend any specific herbs for enhancing surfactant production?
Oh, no, nothing comes to mind, but I think that Matthew Woods did talk about that a little bit in his paper that he put out yesterday. So I would say check into that.
And Linda asks if there are any places that we can that she can find any seeds for plantain or mullein.
Yeah, mullein, I know you can look at True Love Seeds in Philadelphia. Owen Taylor of True Love Seeds has mullein. Plantain, you could probably get plantain seeds from like Strictly Medicinals, or maybe even Richter's Seeds would have it. I know Strictly Medicinals has it, the seeds.
Do you recognize fenugreek for?
Oh, that was me. Sorry. Sorry.
Is golden seal a hybrid of goldenrod?
No, golden seal is a different plant. Yeah, and it's the root of golden seal that we harvest, the hydrastis plant. And it is a plant that is at risk. It's a plant that's native to our region here in Maryland, but it's a plant that we really do need to be pretty careful about harvesting because we're running the risk of it going extinct. But it is a plant that is considered, quite potent as a, antiseptic, antiviral.
I think that's all of our questions.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. I really enjoyed sharing this with you. I hope this was helpful, and that when you see information in the future about these different, this virus in particular, that you might know some of the vocabulary now that people are talking about. And I will send you recipes this evening, and we'll send you the video so you can look it over again if you need to. And feel free to reach out by email if you have more questions or things that didn't make sense and you just want to clarify. My email is lacey@foxhavenfarm.org.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.